When a man idealizes a woman and projects his anima onto her, he gives her tremendous power. Why is it dangerous for women to identify with that projection? Or like Marilyn Monroe, to become the love goddess and live out his desires?
Because, as we know from the life history of Marilyn Monroe, she did not live her own life. She acted all the time the anima of men. Generally, there are women, and that is ultimately due to the power drive. When women discover that if they are beautiful, they can exert a magic power over men, then they take to acting all the time the anima. We are even in our jargon sometimes talking about anima women. Those are women who find out how to act the anima to men. And because this is not love but pure power drive, it is destructive to the men and to themselves. Because it's using the guise of love for worldly power. Such women want to rule the men, they want the men to be all at their feet, and then they naturally are unhappy because they don't feel loved. I remember when I was young, sometimes when a man projected his anima onto me and was pursuing me and giving me presents and so on, I had the distinct feeling, but that fellow doesn't know me at all. He's chasing an image. I wanted to look back. Who is he chasing? It's not me. Me as a human being he doesn't see. And so if a woman falls into the trap of acting out the anima, she can exert a tremendous power over men. But at the same time, inwardly, she's frustrated because those men love her image, they don't love her. So she's really very lonely underneath. And that's what caught up with poor Marilyn Monroe.
And does this woman who's playing the anima, does she just fulfill the man's needs? Anything he wants, she does, or how does it work?
It works as long as it is an adventure or a love affair. Then she fills out his needs. But when he has to live with her, if he marries her and has to live with her in everyday life, then comes the trouble. She will play the anima to all the other men as well, and he'll not like that. And secondly, he'll suddenly discover that underneath that beautiful mask, there is no human being. There's no warmth. There's no possibility of a human relationship. So to marry an anima figure is most disappointing. And that...
I think it's important that we have a discussion about this idea of playing the anima, right? See, the anima is a man's internal projection towards the outside world. It's his internal image of what he views as the perfect woman. This is what makes him feel safe. This is what makes him feel protected. This is what makes him feel connected. This is what makes him feel like a man, with or without actually having to be one. And I'm not a fan of the sign language, like that whole real man talk. I'm not a fan of that. But what I will say is a certain level of security is needed to be masculine dominant. Because understand that you can make enough money or get enough success or get enough social acclaim to get a woman in your life who's willing to play the role of what she thinks your ego wants for a finite period of time in order to try to get what she wants from you. That's completely different from being feminine submissive, right? Many women have no fucking idea or frame of reference what it means to be truly feminine submissive. I'll say that right now, right? There's cooperation. They understand somewhat of the concept of cooperation. And some of them also understand the concept of lying to stroke a man's ego in order to manipulate the situation to get their way. When we're talking about like dark feminine energy, when we're talking about like the feminine dominant, And sometimes we're talking about the masculine submissive, because understand, if a man has a Madonna whore complex, then typically it's going to be a matter of having a split anima. So it's going to be this damn near virginal or this born-again virgin, this type of woman. Typically the born-again virgin is not within that, but men let it slide these days for that. The woman who's very wholesome, who just wants to be treated well. From a masculine perspective, kind of love for sex, type of transactional sex. You know, the big three: emotional validation, social validation, financial investment. Right? And in exchange, you get sex and cooperation and feminine energy. That's one. Right? The masculine submissive man, he may want that. On the surface, he says he wants that. But ultimately, the masculine submissive is going to be attracted to the feminine dominant. Because if he gets on an equivalent level what it is that he's providing, that's not going to be enough for him to truly feel satisfied and desired. So oftentimes it's going to be the feminine dominant who may love bomb him, right? The feminine dominant who may play emotional games, who allows him to open up emotionally, who gives him those finite moments of experiencing the feminine submissive for himself, because the masculine submissive can go into the feminine submissive for short periods of time. It's something to understand about the sexual polarity quadrant, but that's typically based off of the feminine dominant using their own feminine energy to get the masculine submissive into the feminine energy. It's a different dynamic, right? But we're just talking about playing the anima. So a woman can, if a man doesn't have a stretching program, if a man doesn't have experience with women being actually feminine submissive with him, if a man isn't aware of a woman who follows instructions without needing a lot of explanation, a woman who desires and craves his leadership and his guidance, a woman who sexually desires him to the extent that she doesn't need a lot of build up to do it, where she desires to be dominated, right? Where she craves him, where she's willing to invest for it herself, and where she's able to do that over a consistent period of time, then he's not really in a position to fully understand that sometimes when he's engaging in certain behaviors, he's typically paying a woman to play the anima, right? Now, what you got to understand about playing the anima is that that woman does not feel as if she's being her true self. That's a representative. That's a mask. That's something that can show up for a finite period of time, but eventually it will feel like self-betrayal. And the thing to understand is that a woman does not respect the man that she feels she has a capacity to manipulate. She doesn't. So she may be able to do that for a little while, but eventually she's going to grow in resentment because she feels as if this man doesn't know the real and the true her. He is falling head over heels for a caricature of this idea of a woman. Now, many women get caught up in playing the anima, right? I remember listening to Marie Louise von Franz, and she was talking about Marilyn Monroe, how she spent her life playing the anima. This got her a lot of success. It's got her a lot of fame. And most of the time when we're looking at different aspects of the dark feminine archetypes, you know, sometimes it's going to be expressed through Lilith. Sometimes it's going to be expressed through Jezebel. Sometimes it's going to be expressed through Persephone. Sometimes it's going to be expressed through Delilah. The Delilah syndrome is often an aspect of this. That playing the anima is not a woman being naturally in the feminine submissive with the man. Right? It's her adopting certain traits that can appear somewhat narcissistic. Now, some women can do that with the desire of a positive and to benefit the man. Now, from that standpoint, if she's attracted to feminine submissiveness and she's truly a masculine dominant woman, then she may put herself in a position where that can work. But oftentimes, that's not really what it is, right? Like, there's a difference between a masculine dominant woman and an attention whore. Just like there's a difference between a masculine dominant man and a fuckboy, right? Like a fuckboy is going to be a guy who gives a woman, he's highly sexually attractive, right? He is sexually appealing. But he's going to give a woman the impression, or to straight up lie about giving her the things that her animus desires, right? Play to her animus, right? To give her the impression that he desires something long-term when he doesn't. To give her the impression that he wants to be her long-term boyfriend or her next husband. To give her the impression that he's not talking to any other girls. To give her the impression that it's all about the emotional connection. To make her feel comfortable enough to let her guard down so that he can take advantage of that finite period of the feminine submissive. To use his own feminine energy to lower the guard of her masculine energy within her masculine submissive, right? So that's what the fuckboy does. I think a great example of that would be Joe, right? On all the things, right? All the things your man won't do by Joe, right? That's the dirty Mac, right? That's the dude who will come into a situation and talk shit about all the things that her man isn't doing, knowing that if he had to spend the same amount of time with that woman, dealing with her attitude, dealing with her characteristics on a specific on a consistent basis, that he wouldn't be able to provide the level of security emotionally, socially, wouldn't be offering monogamy, wouldn't be offering these different things that this woman desires, wouldn't have the emotional maturity, intelligence, or security, and wouldn't have that true love and investment over a considerable period of time. And over that period of time, he would probably be a worse man than the man she's already with, right? But the dirty Mac plays on the lack of trust that the woman already has in that man due to areas that she was wrong or areas that he was wrong, resentment that gets built up within that relationship dynamic, and then takes advantage of those little holes in that relationship dynamic. Now, playing the anima is a powerful thing. But one thing that I often say is that just like the masculine submissive is meant for something more short term, because consistent periods of time of self-betrayal leads to resentment towards the other person, and it leads to a degradation of one's own sense of self-worth and values. In the same way, a person who tries to take the feminine dominant stance over a consistent period of time, it's like the feminine dominant is meant to be a love bomb. It's meant to be a glass cannon, but typically it's not going to be something that has any consistent value that comes out of it. Not that it's impossible, not that a short period of feminine dominance or a flash in the pan and here and there isn't something that can reinvigorate a relationship dynamic. It's simply that if that's your primary mode that you're operating out of, or if that becomes too consistently what you're operating out of, then it can lead to issues. Now, what does it really mean to be feminine submissive? And what is the difference between the attention whore or the succubus, right, and the feminine submissive woman, or the masculine dominant woman, right? Now, the masculine dominant woman is a woman who doesn't have to use her sex appeal. She can be attractive. It definitely benefits to be attractive, but she doesn't have to use her sex appeal to lure a man in to want to spend time with her non-sexually. She actually adds value, information into that man's life, to that submissive man's life, and knows how to reward good behavior based off of how feminine submissive that man is with her. She makes that experience, non-sexually, that dating experience, all these things, so intrinsically rewarding that sex becomes a lower priority, but he still desires the sex, right? She knows how to teach whatever she likes sexually, which means she has to have enough experience that the peak of the sexual experiences she desires to have, she knows how to teach that to the man she's with. And there also needs to be a certain level of consistency or upfront honesty about certain things. So that means one masculine dominant woman is going to be the type of woman who is celibate or abstinent, right? And she's not having any sex at all, right? So she's building up her sensitivity sexually so that she can actually integrate with that man once she engages with the man who's actually, so she can reward the good behavior. Now, one masculine dominant woman is going to deal with a man who's highly feminine submissive. She's going to be honest with him that she may have sex with other guys, but ultimately she's going through this process of delayed gratification, teasing, edging, pleasure, denial. Now, there's a difference between the feminine submissive, right, and the succubus, right? There's these different things to understand, right? But plainly, anima is a real thing, right? What you have to understand is that many women don't truly understand what it means to be feminine, nor what it means to be submissive. They're typically going to be one or the other, because most people are not in an abundance mindset. Most people are in a survival mode. And it feels good to take your power back in situations where you felt like you were powerless. You know, it feels good, right, for a woman to go into her feminine energy when she's tried to be masculine submissive, to have those covert contracts, and then to start to nag at a guy, and it's not working. And then her animus is clashing with that man's masculine energy, and then that man is starting to get aggressive with her, or he's starting to shut down, right? And then she says, you know what? If I can just be feminine with him, and to manipulate him through just saying, oh, well, this is something I like when a guy does this, then the masculine submissive man, he may hear that, pick up on that, and be like, oh, well, she's giving me feminine energy, so yeah, I can do the things she wants, and then she rewards good behavior, right? But it doesn't last. It wears out. The respect wears down. The actual desire involved wears down. One thing that I've noticed is this, and this is something that's pretty concurrent when it comes to sex work, right? I think that, like, when you notice strippers are women who play the anima. They know that the person who they're conveying themselves to be, not saying all, there may be exceptions, but the woman that they're conveying themselves to be, when they're up on that stage, when they're up on that pole, when they're giving those lap dances, is she's playing to this image within this man's mind of the whore archetype. And then by accepting that man, or giving him the impression of accepting him from that stance, then that man feels accepted, he feels wanted, even if he knows it's not real, and he's willing to give up his resources. Remember, the masculine submissive is going to be compatible with the feminine dominant on some level. Just like there's a little narcissism in every codependent. There's a little bit of codependency in every narcissist, right? Where the way these things reflect off of one another, right? Because secure people typically are not going to be attracted to certain aspects of personality types and characteristics that are reminiscent of like hardcore narcissism. Everybody has narcissism in them. Let's get that clear right now. Everybody has a certain level of these things in them, right? But the secure person is typically not going to be attracted to those heavy mood swings that come with someone who has traits of borderline personality disorder. The secure person is not going to be attracted to someone who wants such an imbalance in the relationship without the competence that correlates to the things that they're offering, right? And one typical rule of thumb I like to give on the matter is this. When we're talking about the sexual polarity quadrant, one typical rule of thumb I like to give is this. To be the dominant is to be the primary giver of pleasure, primary receiver of control. Cool, right? Primary giver of pleasure, primary receiver of control. And to be the submissive is to be the primary giver of control, the primary receiver of pleasure. Once you're both in the position of the primary receiver of pleasure and the primary receiver of control, there's an imbalance. But once you're in the position of both the primary giver of pleasure and the primary giver of control, there's an imbalance. Once you're in that position, there's typically a different type of transaction that's made. What it means to be feminine is to be fluid. Think about it like water. It's flowing. It shapes to its environment. Now, in this water that flows, you can either be feminine submissive, right? Which is you're malleable about the way in which you give up control from a secure place. Because you understand intuitively that the pleasure that you're going to receive in giving up control is going to be greater than the pleasure that you will receive if you were stuck to the confines of doing things the way that you preconceived within your own mind. And to understand the difference between masculine and feminine is to say, I know who I want. Masculine is to say, I know what I want. To be feminine is to know, I want to connect, right? I want to connect with this individual. To be masculine says that I have principles and a process that I want to follow. Very important concept to understand, right? Femininity lubricates submissiveness to experience and to crave and to enjoy domination, right? Masculine energy stifles submissiveness, right? But a very important concept to also understand, right, is that feminine energy corrupts dominance, right? But masculine energy adds principle, discipline, focus, and concentration to dominance. Now, this is why I talk about the sexual polarity quadrant, right? But oftentimes what playing the anima does is it comes from a place of premature integration. Eventually resentment will rise out of it. And this is one reason why if you're taking a masculine dominant stance, it's good to have a program that stretches an individual, because it will quickly test certain things, right? Like if you tell a woman, let's go on this date. Be ready, 7 o'clock, Thursday night. Wear something casual or wear something comfortable. I'm taking you out. If she's a masculine submissive woman, right, then that may be the type of woman who will want to agree, but then she'll want to know all of the details first. Because the defense mechanism of her masculine energy, it causes her to need a certain level of comfort and reassurance, because her desire to connect with you isn't focused enough on you. It's focused more so on the details surrounding what you're doing. Therefore, that defense mechanism, it stifles the submissive energy. So if you want a feminine submissive woman, one of the best ways to do things is to give instructions without explaining them. That's one of the best ways up front. And then after the experience is given, right? And that from that feminine submissive stance, right? That experience is given. It's had. It's enjoyed. It's better than that person thought it would be if they did things the way that they typically would like to do things or envision themselves doing things. Then you explain it later, right? Then you start to integrate their logical thought process, the animus, back into that on that particular level for that particular type of engagement. And then that is something where that's more so in alignment, right? Something to understand. Now, when it comes to the feminine dominant woman, one way to handle those type of situations is just to have certain boundaries that you don't cross. And certain boundaries that you will not accept or tolerate. And to stick to your masculine energy rather than getting into your feminine energy and to display that dominance in a way that either allow up front, you can overpower the dominance of the feminine dominant, but in the long run, your masculinity has to be solid enough to not be moved off of the center of your rock, of your foundation. So one thing I've said in the video before is that up front, your dominance is more important. Over the long term, your masculinity is more important. Not everybody who you interact with is going to be someone you integrate with. Right? So there's a lot of different ways of engaging with this. The thing to understand about the feminine dominance, oftentimes it's going to be love bombing involved. Oftentimes there's going to be some inconsistency involved by not over pursuing certain situations, by not, by sticking to your guns on certain situations, by not leading with the full package. You get to avoid certain things. By not being too emotionally moved, by being in a scenario where a person doesn't stick to their word 100% of the time, and you stay solid on who you are. That's one thing that overcomes the feminine dominance. Because you have to understand that both feminine dominance and masculine submissiveness are survival mode. Right? The feminine dominant is like a person who is in a state of survival mode, who says, you know what? I can't follow the rules and get my way. So I'm just going to break the rules. Whatever it takes for me to get what I want, that's what I'm going to do. But within the feminine dominant, it's a very short span of time in which those things can take place. And then the real them comes out. Right? With the masculine submissive, sometimes it's best to overcome that up front. But over time, a certain level of staying on your masculine core, if they recognize where their social programming, because the masculine submissive is where you follow the everyday accepted socially programmed thought process of dating and relationships or different life scenarios in order to think you're going to get ahead, but really you leave yourself in a stance of stagnancy. So the feminine dominant would be kind of like selling drugs or scamming, right? Like Ponzi schemes. The masculine submissive would be more so like working a 9-to-5 job, right? Built in stagnancy, right? You're never going to become a millionaire working, I'm not saying you never can, but chances are you're not going to become a millionaire when you resign yourself to working entry-level positions forever. It'll give you a certain level of survival, but it's going to lack the emotional or the intrinsic desire and fulfillment. In the masculine submissive, you're giving up a certain level of your body in exchange for what you're going to get out of it. That's like when you go to work, you say, okay, I don't like what I'm going to do when I get to work, but I might like a couple of the people there. That makes it a little bit fulfilling because some of the people I like there. But what I'm doing for the sake of what I'm doing is not something I intrinsically desire to do. But I like a couple of the people there. That's where the emotion comes from. The emotional validation of the people I see at work. And then I get the financial investment, right? That comes with getting paid every 2 weeks or getting paid every week. And that makes it worth how much of my time and power and control over what I do with my body I have to give up on a consistent basis in order to get what I want. And then they purchase things that make them feel a little bit more control in their lives when they get off. But at work, it doesn't work that way. Now, the feminine submissive would be more like being an artist, right? You may have to go buy your own paintbrushes, right? You may have to buy your own DAWs, your own digital audio workstations. I'm a music producer, right? I'm on YouTube. I'm not monetized yet. I'm doing these things because I enjoy doing these things. I intrinsically enjoy making these YouTube videos. That's feminine submissive. And I have to submit myself to certain guidelines. Not 100% yet, but there's certain things I can't just do, right? And when we understand these thought processes, the feminine submissive is like when you go into a dojo and you're learning from a new master in a different martial arts system. And within that martial arts system, you might have to go put in work outside of when you're at the dojo. When you're at the dojo, you're under the tutelage of that master. And when you're under the tutelage of that master, they're giving you instructions. They may push you. They may do things that are somewhat a little bit manipulative to bring something more out of you than you were initially anticipating. If you go in there and you just do the bare minimum, you're never really going to excel. Right? You're not going to get the time because they don't see talent or they don't see effort. The coach is not going to take more time with you. So eventually you're going to fall off. You're not really going to excel. You're going to stay at a white belt level, yellow belt level. You're never going to get above that level. Now, being a masculine dominant is being a leader. Right? There's a difference between the leader and the player, right? And I know that being a player by like how Alan Curry would express it, or how Kay Zagatwini would express it, how Mr. Lucario would express it, how different people express it within this space. Being a player is different in the eyes of real players than it is in the mainstream media. In the mainstream media, being viewed as a player is being viewed as a liar. And that's what I put for the sexual polarity quadrant. That's not the most accurate thing. So I probably do need to, change those words up. I may or may not. Because a real player is not going to lie to a woman about, having another woman. He's not going to lie to a woman about wanting to be in a monogamous relationship, right? But maybe that's a no true Scotsman fallacy, because there are some guys who are players who do that. But for the most part, the players I know who are really down to their program and their game, that's not really how they move. Right? But the leader also factors in the self-actualization of their follower, which means that they're not only thinking about, okay, cool, I do need to eat somewhat off of what I'm doing, right? So I am going to benefit from this, but you're going to gain this knowledge, you're going to gain this experience, right? And this is going to enrich your life. But they have to have the emotional discipline to not abuse that power. And that's where a lot of the fear comes from, where many women play the Anima because they're in a position where their viewership, or how they interpret and how they've experienced leadership, has been a scenario in which they don't view leadership from a pure place because they haven't experienced it before. So oftentimes their idea of a leader is more integrated than they are integrated. Right? And that's a tough one to kind of bypass sometimes. Because the dick ain't free. The information isn't free. The game is to be sold and not to be told. Because if somebody has certain knowledge, they have a certain skill set, and they were to teach something, you have to understand that if they do not put you through a certain trying, they don't put you through certain tests, through certain aspects of that process, to see where you are, to test you to the point of failure, and then to give you the opportunity to grow from that, then you may hear everything they say, let it go in one ear, out the other, take whatever tickles your ear, and then run with it as if you fully understand it when you do not. So there is a process of testing your receptiveness before putting you in a position to misrepresent their tutelage. Right? To misrepresent their dojo, to misrepresent their program, to misrepresent them in a public setting, which may besmirch their reputation or their character, especially if you misuse the things that they teach you. I give a lot of free game on here. I do. But I also understand that I have to add value before I ask value. Right? Especially when it comes to this type of space. This is an experience. Somebody wants to come to me specifically for coaching sessions, then that's a different process. things become a little bit more specific to their own personal situations. I'm just sharing information right now. And I'm not perfect either. Let's say we're talking about maybe a woman I deal with. She has a process she'd have to go through, right? I don't pick favorites with that. But there's different things to understand when it comes to this process, when it comes to playing the anima, right? Many of the things that we see, right? Like I remember seeing Ari Lennox, and she was, every once in a while she'll go online and talk about how she's tired of making sexual songs. But then a couple weeks later, she'll drop another sexual song. I love Ari Lennox. She's one of my favorite artists, right? Or sometimes we'll see like Meg Thee Stallion saying, making all the music that she makes to sell that image of being that ideal boss bitch type of woman to the outside world. And then young girls and women who are a little bit close to her age, some even older, will feed off of that idea, right? But then when she goes to court with Tory Lanez, and then she's saying that her man feels embarrassed about her past because they brought up a bunch of her experiences. Or we'll see Cardi B, right? And she goes and she makes her song, says, I don't cook, I don't clean, but let me tell you, I got this ring. And then you see Offset, and he's sharing a video online saying she lied because she in there cooking and cleaning, even though she a millionaire, right? Don't let these women who do not even understand the nature of submissiveness and understand the nature of femininity, and they'll say, oh, how can you tell me what it means to be feminine and you're not a woman? If you know, you know. If you don't, you don't. Many women do not understand these things, and then they try to share about these things as if they do, when really their idea of being feminine is simply being someone who is receiving resources from a man, someone who's receiving validation from a man, someone who's receiving the ESF, emotional validation, social validation, financial investment that they haven't earned, and then trying to reward the man with pussy or the idea of pussy or just her company, thinking that that's being feminine and submissive, giving a baseline level of cooperation, right? That's not what it means to be feminine. That's not what it means to be submissive. It's not. That could be masculine submissive if it's a direct correlation, and it could be feminine dominant, and it could even be masculine dominant if she expects these things and then she rewards good behavior. But that's not feminine or submissive. That's playing the anima, right? Because truly, being submissive has nothing to do with money. One of the biggest categories of submissives oftentimes is going to be men who have a lot of money, who are going to these dames, right? Or these sex workers who play the role of the dominant, and then they get their pleasure needs met and certain fantasies met in exchange for the resources of those men. And although those men are the ones who have the money, and they may be gifting the women, even without sex taking place, but that man is still in a submissive position. Understand what I'm saying? There are women who have more money than their men and are still submissive with their men. And also, submission and dominance has nothing to do with gender roles, right? And I'm talking about the traditional gender roles as far as who stays at home and who works, or is it 50-50? That shit don't fucking matter. A good leader is going to look at what everybody brings to the table and is going to delegate tasks and is going to think of ways of making sure that things run smoothly and copacetically, right? That's what a leader does. A leader is going to factor these different things in to delegate tasks, right? As a leader, if I'm dealing with a woman, me personally, if I'm dealing with a woman and I know she has a particular skill set that she developed before she met me, and this is something that could benefit me in my program, she's still on my program, but I may say, hey, baby, take care of that. She may be better at planning trips, right? She may have a degree in accounting. She may be more in tune with understanding different aspects of nutrition or health, right? But in my areas of competence, those are my primary areas of competence, and that's going to be what I set the foundation of that relationship on. things outside of that are going to be secondary or tertiary, right? So we got to understand what playing the anima is versus being feminine and submissive. This is Coach Brody. I'm out.